that's still really good. Really surprised how well it's held up since I've redone that.
Oh hi. How are you guys doing today? Sorry, I didn't even see you there. My name's Chris Langgrave. I'm the general manager at Deep River Water Park in Crown Point, Indiana. You know, where it's simply splashtastic. You caught me doing one of my favorite things, and that would be inspecting our play structure. What's more fun than a play structure? And I'd be willing to bet that most water parks have a play structure such as this. Now this one was done in the mid-2000s, and that means that we're going to have a huge amount of netting on this structure. Got pretty popular about that. Well, with that comes a couple of things. You got to stay up on this netting because it does deteriorate. Keep in mind, we're using treated water, and there's nothing worse for metal, fabric, than treated water. So you got to keep up on these nets. The other thing you got to watch is your lashing, which holds the nets together. And that's what we're focusing on a little bit today here. The lashing is really a neat thing. It's generally small cable, and we're going to get into that here in a minute. But what we have is a situation where you have multiple panels of rope, several different panels. And you've got them all tied together in this one wad, really, to not call it anything else. I guess I don't know what else I would call it. So you've got one wad here, and it's held together, and sometimes there's some redundant lashing. Sometimes when you do a base net and a side net, or a base net with a secondary net, you lash it. Then you do these barrier nets, you lash it again. So you get multiple lashings going around here, which does give some additional safety. And when you figure what the tensile strength of some of this rope is, you're not likely to break this. But it will break down. So that's what we're focusing on today, is lashing. When you have a lot of nets like this on a play structure, obviously you're going to need to keep a supply of things. If you don't have the custom sized nets to replace them, you're going to need like some raw material, just big sheets of netting or rolls of netting. You're going to need some barrier, which could be a decent sized rope, like a rope that would be 1/2 inch in diameter to make a barrier and then lash it together. And a lot of this isn't making a lot of sense to you right now because really it's going a little further than what we want to do. What we need to worry about right now is the material we're going to relash with. This is a polyester, it's wax coated, and it is braided, and it is very strong. It's a fairly decent sized diameter. And this is what actually came on the structure to begin with. I don't have much of that left, but it is a good product. It is resistant to a lot of the chemically treated water. This is a nylon. Twisted, and this is what we've been using a lot of. This is a 0.125, I believe, in size, but it's very strong, very high tensile strength. It is completely impervious to rot and to UV. I mean, it's a great product, and it does last several years once you put it in. That's probably what we'll be using. This, for other applications, this is a twisted, and I believe this is a linen. It is waxed as well. What the waxing does is when you actually lash this stuff together, the waxing kind of grips and holds it all together, helps out with that a little bit. It is nice to have. Then this is a cotton lacing rope, and I'm not a big fan of cotton, especially in the water park. There's no reason to have it. It's just going to rot very quickly. That's not something you want to use. Some of the other tools you're going to want when you do some of these projects: zip ties. A simple zip tie, and no, not to fix the hole. That's not what you want to use it for. What these I found are very good for is when you have a whole panel that you're replacing, pre-hanging the panel with zip ties makes it a lot easier than to go back and lash, and then these can be cut away easy enough. So I always have the zip ties on hand. Some sort of knife or utility knife to cut away some of the old lashing, depending on how you're doing it. Sometimes you go through a few blades if you're cutting away an entire panel. Today we're not doing that. Today we're just going to fix a quick seam, but these are still great to have. If you're using a nylon lashing cable, I know this is probably not the safest thing in the world, I like to use MAP gas or some sort of a torch to melt it. And the reason I like to do that is because then you're not having to whip the ends of the lashing cable. Sometimes, like with the cotton or with the linen or some of the other ones, you really have to whip the end, and that's to stop this kind of nonsense from happening. whipping the end, you either take an even smaller twine and go around it to hold it together, or you use some sort of tape and then cut through the tape. There's many ways to do that, but when you're using nylon and you burn through it, it whips itself. It melts all those fibers together, and then it does not come apart. One of the last things to look at is gloves. Now these are just regular work gloves, obviously not mine because they've been used, but these are regular work gloves. I like to have them with the fingertips cut off, because you can still get your fingers into like some of the smaller areas that we're going to see here in a minute, but at the same time, then when you grab the lashing cable to pull it really tight, you're not ripping yourself apart. So let's move on to the fixing portion. Okay, now you're gonna hear me and not see me, and I know that's a problem for a lot of you, but that's okay. I'll be back on the camera soon. What we have here is what happened. We have some what was just kind of worn out, rotted lashing, and I've cut most of it away with my handy utility knife. We try not to cut ourselves, because that would be a bad thing. And we have some good solid lashing. There's no reason to tear all this out right now. We're like 4 days left to the end of our season, and I can do that later. But we've got this spot where we've got two really good pieces, really strong pieces of lashing. So what I'm going to do, instead of what I would normally do, would be to tie a bowline and then start lashing from there. But since this is already anchored, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a square knot. Okay, and most everybody knows how to do a square knot. If you don't know how to do a square knot, you're going to have to look that up. And if you go to Wikipedia or just do a general Google for it, whatever. But this is a square knot, if you can see that. That's a square knot, and that is a really good place to start when you're adding on. So now what I'm going to do is just start lashing. Okay, now this is going to be a little challenging because we have this really, really small barrier net there, okay? In addition to the base net and the lower barrier net, which is a little bit bigger. So what I do in these situations is I go pretty high, and you just have to kind of fish it through. This has got some stiffness to it, so you can generally do that. Now, as you do that, you want to bring it back in upon itself, and then guide any knot that you've made through, because you don't want to do any more damage than's already been done. Although, once again, this only has to last for about 4 days, which will not be a problem. And then you go back through the same way you did it the first time. So back through, down, reach through, grab it, and then once again, shoot the hoop right on in the hoop. And that's it. And then you give it a good tug. This is where the gloves would come in if I were smart. Give it a good tug, and there you go. And I've released tension on that, but it has not released tension here. And that's what's important. You want to make sure that when you're lashing, it's locking on itself, and it is. So I'm going to do this one more time here so everybody can see, nice and slow. You go through, pick a spot, and you want to go back through the same spot with the second one. Go grab it, you shoot the hoop, and what that's doing is, okay, that is keeping this from collapsing back down. Pull it a little taut, grab the end again, through the same hole, the same direction. It's very important that you're consistent with this. Cool. So we're making our headway here. I'm just going to keep doing it. Remember, be consistent. Doesn't matter if you start top or bottom. I just like to start top, and sometimes it's determined by where you're at. Obviously here it's easy to go through the top and come out the bottom, but it might be a little more difficult in other places. So just so you can be aware, there is no rule that says you have to do top to bottom or bottom to top or any of that nonsense. And what these are that I'm doing really are basically half hitches. They're just kind of a long half hitch. Okay, so there we go. We're getting it nice and tight. I'm going to do one more. Right here you can see we're back up to the good lashing. And I don't know if you can see this, but we've got kind of a little pattern here. That's tight. That's tight. Everything looks pretty good. So now we're going to do our last one. We can do this a couple of ways. We're not too concerned today because This is oh, too high. This is going to be only here for about 5 days of operation, because you can see this is starting to deteriorate down here, this barrier netting. So we're going to just replace this at the beginning of the season, or here in the fall. But there's no reason to go too crazy. It takes time. The other thing to keep in mind is it does take time to order nets. So if you have something that's starting to go, I don't know, depending on who your net supplier is, you're going to have to make sure you think about that in advance and get them ordered. Because if this just happened, this should happen to go, you may be closing this section off because you don't have a net to replace it with. And that wouldn't be good. Your customers certainly wouldn't be happy. I like to kind of check the condition of stuff at the beginning of the year, and if it all looks sketchy to me, I try to replace it. If we don't have time, I will go ahead and order the part anyway, and then when it does come time to replace it, I have it, and I can do it in a fairly quick, very quick manner. A panel, like one of these panels that are 60 by 45, something like that, inches, that'll take about an hour to replace a panel like that. So just so you have that information, it can generally be done, a whole panel can be done before you open. Now you'll notice I'm going over the good lashing. The good lashing's terminated right there. There's no reason not to, it's just a little redundancy. Rope is cheap. So there we go. Now that is done. So my next point where I want to terminate this, I want it to be this way, to keep tension on that. I'm going to find a good piece of lashing here, and I'm just going to terminate to that. This is going to be a simple couple half hitches. Get a few of those together, and that's excellent, and that is going to hold just fine. And there we go. Now I'm going to burn the end of this off, which is going to melt it and terminate it, and this is our repair. Not too bad. Very quick. Now it's safe again. It's not going to pull apart. Nobody's going to get their foot stuck in there. Okay. Now I take my torch, melt the end, and that is that. And you can see that it has melted the end of the rope together, and that is a good temporary fix. I'm not going to mess with that any further. Now if it were going to be better than that, I'd probably cut it a little shorter, give it a quick burn, let it melt together, and it would be fine.